This is Dark Perimeter, and this is something a little different. We spend most of our time on this show talking about systems, networks, models, controls, the things that fail and the reasons they fail. But every one of those systems has a person standing next to it, and that person has a perimeter of their own. It gets probed, it takes hits. And most of us have never spent 5 minutes thinking about how it's defended, so we're starting a strand. We're calling it Perimeter of the Mind. Same show, same discipline, pointed inward. And we're going to start with the single most common thing that gets through the human perimeter in this industry and every other one. Your boss finding fault and you carrying it for a week. Here's the shape of it, and if this is your situation, you already know it by heart. Something small goes sideways. A control didn't hold, a date slipped, a report had a wrong number in it, and your manager's first move is not what happened. It's who did this. The temperature in the room changes. His voice changes. And some part of you, a part that has nothing to do with your title or your certifications or the 15 years you've put in, flinches. Then here's the part that actually does the damage. A week later, he's forgotten it. Entirely. He's friendly, he's asking about your weekend, he's moved on to the next fire, and you're still carrying the thing. You're running it at 11 at night, wondering what he really thinks of you, wondering if it went in some file somewhere. That gap is the whole problem, not his temper. The gap between how long he holds it and how long you do. So let's start with what blame actually is, because I think most people have this wrong in a way that keeps them stuck. Blame is not an assessment of you. Blame is a coping mechanism for uncertainty. When something goes wrong, a manager has two problems on his hands. There's the practical problem, which is the thing that broke. And then there's the psychological problem, which is that the world just demonstrated it can surprise him. Assigning a cause solves the second problem instantly. If it has a name, if it has a face, then it wasn't random. And if it wasn't random, it's controllable. And if it's controllable, he's not exposed. That's what's happening. He is not sitting there evaluating your competence. He is managing his own sense of exposure, and the fastest sedative available in that moment is a culprit, which is exactly why he forgets a week later. The blame did its job the second it landed. It was never a considered judgment about you, so it never got filed anywhere permanent. He discharged the feeling. You absorbed it. That's the asymmetry, and it's the entire reason you're the one still awake. He regulates by expressing. You regulate by absorbing. His system works beautifully for him and terribly for you. Now, most of you listening already know intellectually that it isn't personal, and you've noticed that knowing it hasn't helped even slightly. That's worth understanding because it's not a failure of insight. It hasn't helped because the part of you that reacts does not process arguments. It processes tone, volume, and social threat, and it processes them in about a quarter of a second, long before your rational brain gets a chance to weigh in with helpful context about management styles. By the time you're thinking clearly, your body has already committed. Heart rate up, cortisol moving. You are, in a small and civilized way, in a fight, so stop expecting understanding to prevent a physical reaction. It won't. Understanding is what you use afterward. In the moment, you need something else, and we'll get to it. There's one more piece here, and it's the uncomfortable one. The people who take blame hardest are almost always the people who never needed external pressure to perform in the first place. You were already holding yourself to a stricter standard than he is. So when he reaches for a culprit, he is not introducing a new accusation. He is confirming one you had already half filed against yourself. That's why it lands the way it does. And it's why the answer is not thicker skin. The answer is a cleaner separation between his voice and yours. So, the moment itself, 3 things, and they're simple enough to actually use while your pulse is up. First, the breath, and specifically the exhale, not a big dramatic inhale. A long, slow exhale, longer than the breath in, twice. Extending the exhale is about the only lever you have that reaches the nervous system directly, and it works in roughly 15 seconds. It will not make you calm, it makes you slightly less hijacked, and slightly less hijacked is enough to get to step 2. Second, get boring. When somebody is escalating and hunting for a target, the 2 things that feed it are defending yourself and matching their energy. Both of those confirm there is something here to fight about. So go flat. Factual, slow. Short sentences, neutral tone. Not cold, not sullen, just profoundly unremarkable. Blame needs friction to sustain itself, and you are going to be very difficult to get a grip on. Third, and this is the highest value move you have, move him from who to what. It works because you are handing him a better version of the thing he actually wants. He wants the situation to feel controlled. Blame is his cheap route there. A plan is a better route, and you are the one holding it. The sentence shape is this. Here's what happened. Here's what I'm already doing about it. Here's what would keep it from happening again. Not defensive, not apologetic. 3 facts, delivered in the voice you'd use to read a weather report. Most blame-oriented managers deflate somewhere in the 3rd sentence because you've handed them the resolution they were digging for and they no longer need a body to feel safe. And if you genuinely made the mistake, own it fast and own it completely in 1 sentence and then go straight to the plan. Ownership without a plan invites more blame because it leaves the situation open. Ownership with a plan closes it. 1 clean sentence, then forward. Now the part that has to happen afterward, when the adrenaline is draining and you are sitting alone with it and the replay loop is warming up. Don't replay. Triage. Take what was said and sort it into 3 buckets. Bucket 1, true and useful. Something real happened and there's something you'd do differently. That's the signal. In my experience, it's 10 or 20% of what got said, and it is almost never the loudest part. Bucket 2, true but badly delivered. The substance is fair, the packaging was awful. Take the substance. Leave the packaging on the table, it is not yours, and you are under no obligation to carry it home. Bucket 3, not true. Heat, projection, pressure coming down from above him, or just a bad day arriving early. Discard it, not as denial, as accuracy. Keeping false feedback isn't humility, it's error in your data set, and you would not tolerate it anywhere else in your work. Do this in writing. On paper, in a note, doesn't matter. Writing it forces the sort to actually finish. Rumination is what happens when your brain has an unresolved item and no closure mechanism available. Sorting is a closure mechanism. 10 minutes of that will do more for you than 2 hours of lying in the dark running the tape. Here's where this show's own discipline turns out to be useful, and I don't think this is a stretch at all. We have a principle in incident work, the blameless postmortem. The premise is that when a system fails, asking who caused it produces defensive people and no learning, while asking what conditions allowed, it produces fixes that hold. Blame produces silence. Silence produces the next outage. Every mature security program on Earth has figured this out, usually the expensive way. You already believe this professionally, so extend it to yourself. Your manager is running a blameful postmortem. You cannot make him stop. but you can run a proper one in parallel, quietly, for your own records. What were the conditions? What was genuinely under my control? What wasn't? What control would change the outcome next time? That's your incident report, and it's more accurate than his for one simple reason. His was produced under emotional load in about 4 seconds. Yours was produced deliberately, with all the facts, after the fact. You don't get to decide which version he walks around with. You absolutely get to decide which one you do. Some of this is preventable, and prevention is enormously cheaper than recovery. Same as everything else we talk about here. Blame-oriented managers are, almost without exception, reacting to surprise. Surprise is the accelerant, which means the more bad news he hears from you first, early, with a fix already attached, the less often the reflex fires at all. Nobody goes looking for a culprit when the person in front of them is visibly already handling it, so the pattern becomes, I want to flag something before it grows. Here's the situation. Here's my plan. Here's what I need from you. You've just converted yourself from a possible cause into an obvious ally. Same information, completely different reception. And after the significant ones, close the loop in writing. Short, unemotional, no defensiveness. Here's what we discussed. Here's what I'm doing. Here's the timeline. 3 lines, it creates a record, and it demonstrates follow-through. And quietly, it does something for you too. It tells your own brain the item is handled and can be set down. 2 more things, and then I'll let you go. The first is your own scoreboard. Here's what happens to people who work for a blame-oriented manager for a long stretch. The only regular feedback in the environment is negative, so the internal scoreboard slowly drifts until it is composed almost entirely of failures, because failures are the only entries anybody bothers to write down. So, write down the other ones. Keep a file. The problem you caught before, it was a problem. The thing you shipped, the person you developed, the note from somebody who said you helped. It takes a minute, a week, and it is not vanity, it's data collection, and you are the only one collecting it. Then when the reflex fires and you feel that pull toward, I'm not good at this, you have something to check it against that isn't just your mood at 10 at night. The second is the 1-week test, and it's the sharpest tool in this whole episode. He forgets in a week. You've observed this. It's not optimism, it's evidence, gathered by you repeatedly. So use it. When something lands hard, ask yourself whether he will remember this in a week. You already know the answer, which brings you to the real question. Why am I holding it longer than the man who said it? Give yourself a window. 20 minutes to feel it, 10 minutes to triage it, and then it goes in the closed file with everything else. When it comes back at 11 at night, and it will, the response is simply, that one's triaged. And then you put your attention somewhere else. That is not suppression. Suppression is refusing to process. You processed it, and processed things are allowed to be finished. One honest note before the outro. Because not all of this is yours to manage, there is a real line between a manager with a blame reflex and a manager creating a hostile environment. The reflex looks like heat that passes, that applies to everybody, that's about events, and that doesn't follow you around afterward. The other thing looks like it's aimed at you specifically, happens in front of an audience on purpose, goes after your character rather than your work, and shows up later in your reviews and your opportunities. If it's the second one, nothing in this episode is the fix, and getting better at absorbing it is not the fix either. That's a situation to document carefully, address directly, and talk through with somebody you trust outside the reporting line. But if it's the first one, and for most of you it will be, then what you are dealing with is a temperament, not a verdict. Temperaments are survivable. Verdicts are not, and that's exactly why it matters to be honest with yourself about which one is actually in front of you. So, the whole thing in 5 lines. His anger is his regulation strategy, not his assessment of you. Exhale, go boring, move him from who to what. Sort what he said into true and useful, true and badly delivered, and not true, and keep only the first 2. Run your own blameless postmortem and hold that version instead of his. He forgets in a week, match him. You spent a long time becoming the kind of person who takes responsibility seriously. That's why this hurts. It's also why you're good at the work. The goal was never to care less. The goal is to stop paying interest on a debt the other guy already wrote off. This has been Perimeter of the Mind. This is Dark Perimeter.